Let's talk a bit about what happened last night. Westmount High School graduate Kamala Harris accepted the Democratic presidential nomination. I've heard some good reviews, some okay reviews about her speech last night. For those of you who were hoping for Kamala Harris to open up and tell Americans watching last night about her formative years in Montreal, you were probably disappointed.
On behalf of everyone whose story could only be written in the greatest nation on earth, I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
Now, if she wanted to be accurate, is that on behalf of those of you whose story was written in Canada and also the United States, well, maybe that would have been a little bit more accurate, but I'm just saying. Jonathan Kalles joins us. You know him from the Big Five, one of our panelists on the Big Five. He's senior director at McMillan Vantage, a national public affairs firm, and he's on the line with his take. Hi, Jonathan.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. So what's your take on Ixnay on the Montreal May?
Well, when she was talking about, her growing up and having to move with her parents and especially her mother for different jobs to Michigan, to Wisconsin, and all the other places the jobs took them. That's where the Montreal piece was missing. And I thought of you immediately. I knew that was going to be something we talked about today.
Yeah.
So there were disappointments in the convention. There was no Hulk Hogan or Kid Rock. So, there are things that, you feel are missing. But I have to say that I've been watching conventions since the 80s, and I was blown away by the production. I've never seen anything like it. Remember that they replaced candidates 4 weeks ago. They ran, other than running late the first night, they were on time. It was effective. It was just well orchestrated. I thought it was really a masterpiece, just in terms of the production value. And when you think back, now after the 4 days of the convention, there were highlights. There are things that we think back to, the roll call and the music, especially Lil Jon, singing From the Window to the Waltz to Georgia's, during Georgia's turn on the roll call. The special segments on reproductive rights, gun violence were very powerful. Gabby Gifford, Hillary Clinton, obviously Joe Biden, the Obamas, Bill Clinton, Doug Emhoff's introduction, and Tim Walz, and especially Gus, and how that's gone viral. There were a lot of highlights. But I think it's really interesting. You had a caller earlier talking about how woke Kamala Harris is.
Perceived. Well, you were listening earlier. Glad to hear that. Yes, we did indeed.
And I think it's interesting because I was actually impressed by how unwoke this convention was. This convention was talking to everyday Americans, whether it was that very powerful piece from the parents of American Israeli hostage, the massive chance in the hall to bring them home, in the refusal to give a platform to some of the bullies and the provocateurs on the extreme left, was to me something really to be noticed. Yes, you had some of the left-wing sort of icons from Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and you had some of the younger ones like AOC and Jasmine Crockett, but you didn't have the real extremists within the party. You also saw a lot about patriotism, which is not something you always associate with the Democrats. It's something you would expect to see at a Republican convention, but the amount of USA chants talking about freedom, that panel with Ruben Gallego, who's running for Senate in Arizona, where he brought up all the veterans, not to mention Tim Walz is a veteran, and the real sort of sense of, we're all in this together. This is not something that the Republicans can just say, we're the only ones who love our country. That was very powerful. And lastly, I would say in her speech specifically, again, who was she talking to? She didn't talk about once being a woman of color. She talked about the fact that she's from the middle class, that her only goal is to help everyone in the middle class grow together, find opportunities. And she's sort of a symbol of that. And that's how she tried to introduce herself in telling her story about, a single mom having to raise two children, all of the experiences that she had that led her to this point, I think she delivered that message very well.
Jonathan, how much of it, though, is preaching to the choir, right? It's the Democratic convention. I don't know how the audiences break down. I get the messaging, and I'll agree with you, quite strong, but is that messaging getting outside of the Democratic silo?
Well, I think polling is what it is, and we're still 72 days away from the election, but we've seen a massive shift. So what you first saw was the base coming home, but you're seeing it grow beyond that, back to almost where Biden and Hillary were. She's not there yet, by the way. There's a lot of work still to be done for her, but trying to get those independents, suburban women. There are groups of white men for Kamala. Mm-hmm. Part of using Tim Walz. Why is the coach? I know he's an assistant coach. Trump was obsessed with that, but yeah. You call everyone a coach. Tim Walz was chosen because he speaks to those independent voters. He's a guy who won a rural Minnesota seat, which is normally red, because he speaks to middle America. And so that's where they're going. That's where this election is going to be won or lost in those swing states, whether it's in the Rust Belt. We're seeing a big shift in North Carolina, where Arizona, Nevada, Georgia are going to go, and then the blue wall in the Midwest, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. This election is going to be close. Okay, at the end of the day, it's going to be a few of those states where the difference is, 5, 10, 15,000 votes. So turnout is going to be huge. I don't know where we're going to be in 2.5 months, but also the question is, we have debates coming up. How are those going to play? What October surprise are we going to have? Because there is always one. Maybe this year it's been so crazy there'll be Martians coming. But ultimately, there'll be a bump. I expect there to be a bump in the polling from the convention because of how well it was done. But then the real work has to be done. And so that's why if someone's asking me to predict, I still think it's too close to call.
Well, and I think your points are very valid on how it seems like they do have a plan of attack to broaden the base, show themselves as patriotic and middle-of-the-road centrist, which I think is where they need to be. But your point is taken. We got debates in September, but then it always happens. Doesn't matter what election is. And you know what? It's so funny because oftentimes it'll be the New York Times, and they'll just publish something one Wednesday in October that Kamala Harris probably needs to be prepared for, right? That could just change things.
You read a tweet from James Comey, so I don't know where the Comey surprise will be, but that just reminded me how the unexpected, you never know.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, listen, Jonathan, thanks for the catch-up here. Thanks for your analysis. I think it was really enlightening this morning. We'll talk again real soon on the Big Five.
Looking forward to it. Take care.
Jonathan Kalles right there, Senior Director at McMillan Vantage, National Public Affairs firm.